How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AETA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you. The ICU existed in a dim, suspended twilight where time no longer moved forward but hovered, stretched thin by machines that breathed and beeped on behalf of those who could not. The air was cool and sterile, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant and metal. Monitors hummed in steady rhythms, their lights blinking like distant signals from a world Helen Markham could no longer reach. Helen lay motionless beneath thin hospital sheets, her body still, her eyes closed, her breath measured by machines. To anyone watching, she was deep in a coma, unconscious, unreachable, absent. But inside, something remained awake. Her mind drifted in a heavy fog, not asleep, not fully conscious either, trapped in a space where thought existed without movement, where awareness had no voice. At first, there was only the mechanical soundscape of the ICU, the soft hiss of oxygen, the low pulse of machines, the distant echo of footsteps in the corridor. Then another sound pushed through the fog, a voice. It was close, too close. Helen recognized it instantly. Sam. Her husband leaned in near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The familiarity of his presence did not bring comfort. Instead, it tightened something inside her, a sudden pressure behind her eyes, a sharp awareness that cut through the haze. He was whispering. Not the way someone whispers love or hope. His tone was light, almost amused, as if he were sharing a private joke. There was no tremor of fear in it, no grief, no concern, only calculation. He spoke softly, carefully, savoring his words. He asked her where she would prefer to be buried. By the river, he suggested, where the water moved fast and the view was open. Or perhaps by the woods, where it was quieter, more secluded. He spoke as though discussing a vacation spot, weighing options, considering cost and convenience. The words struck Helen like blows. Her mind surged with pain and rage. Something inside her recoiled, screamed, demanded to wake, to move, to stop him. Blood seemed to rush through her head, pounding against an invisible barrier. She tried to open her eyes, tried to tighten her fingers, tried to make a sound. Nothing happened. Her body did not respond. Sam continued speaking, his voice calm, confident. He joked about arrangements, about practicality, about how little it would matter in the end. To him, she was already gone, already reduced to a problem being solved. The machines kept humming, indifferent, steady. The room did not react. No alarms sounded. No one entered. The stillness of the ICU pressed in around them, cold and absolute, amplifying the cruelty of his words. In that sterile silence, Helen understood something terrifying. She could hear him, and he believed she never would. The horror was not in death itself, but in knowing she was alive enough to listen and powerless to stop him. The door to the ICU slid open with a soft mechanical sound, letting in a narrow strip of brighter light. From the corridor, a nurse stepped inside, her movements efficient and quiet, as if she had learned long ago not to disturb the fragile balance of the room. She glanced first at the monitors, then at the still figure on the bed. Sam Brooks was already there. He stood near Helen's bedside, impeccably dressed, his jacket pressed, his hair carefully styled. He looked less like a grieving husband and more like someone stopping by after a business meeting. When he noticed the nurse, he turned easily, offering a relaxed smile. "I come by to talk to her," he said lightly, gesturing toward Helen. "I read somewhere it helps. You know, therapy." The nurse hesitated. She had seen many spouses in this unit, exhausted, hollow-eyed, clinging to hope or drowning in despair. Sam did not resemble any of them. There was no tension in his shoulders, no redness in his eyes. His voice carried a strange brightness, almost playful. "That's thoughtful," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. Sam leaned closer to Helen again, lowering his voice as if continuing a private conversation. He chuckled softly, then straightened, apparently satisfied. After a few more casual remarks, he checked his watch and announced he had to go. With a final glance at the bed, he left the room as easily as he had entered. The nurse watched the door close behind him. Only then did she turn fully to Helen. She moved closer, studying the monitor readings, then Helen's face. Something was different. The changes were subtle, so slight they could easily be dismissed as wishful thinking, but the nurse had learned to trust her instincts. She checked Helen's pupils, then repeated the test more carefully. Her breath caught. There was a response. Not dramatic, not obvious, but real. The nurse leaned in, her voice low and steady. "Helen, if you can hear me, try to say something." For a long moment, nothing happened. The machines continued their steady rhythm. The nurse felt a familiar disappointment begin to form, until Helen's lips moved. The sound that followed was weak, barely more than air, but it was unmistakable. "Please," Helen whispered. The nurse froze, then smiled despite herself. She was already turning toward the door, ready to call for a doctor, when Helen spoke again, more clearly this time. "Wait." The nurse stopped. Helen's voice was slow, strained, each word requiring effort. "Don't tell, my husband." Confusion crossed the nurse's face. "He needs to know you're waking up." "No," Helen said, forcing the word out. "Please, not yet." Something in Helen's tone, quiet, deliberate, urgent, made the nurse pause. She looked down at the woman in the bed, no longer just a patient, but someone asking for trust. "All right," she said finally, "I'll help you, but we do this carefully." In that moment, something shifted. Helen was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to take control. The accident happened on a gray Pittsburgh morning, when winter had not fully released the city, and the road still carried a thin, deceptive sheen. Traffic moved cautiously along the slick pavement, tires hissing softly against asphalt that looked safer than it was. Helen had been driving toward campus, her thoughts fixed on an upcoming lecture and a dataset she had reviewed late into the night. She slowed as she approached an intersection near the river, easing her foot onto the brake. The car responded a second too late. The wheels lost traction. The skid was brief but violent, the kind that offered no time for correction. Helen's car slid sideways into oncoming traffic, its front end colliding with the side of a city bus. Metal folded inward with a sound that witnesses later struggled to describe. Airbags deployed, glass shattered. The bus screeched to a halt, passengers screaming as the impact echoed down the street. Helen did not regain consciousness at the scene. Paramedics worked quickly, their movements precise, practiced. She was intubated on the asphalt, her head stabilized before she was rushed to the nearest trauma center. The diagnosis was severe traumatic brain injury, swelling, diffuse damage, a deep coma with no clear timeline for recovery. In the ICU, doctors explained the condition carefully. Coma awareness, they said, was rare but documented. The brain could process sound even when the body showed no response. There were no guarantees, no promises, nothing supernatural, just biology and uncertainty. Sam Brooks arrived at the hospital hours later, composed and attentive. He nodded as physicians spoke, asked the right questions, signed the necessary forms. He stood at Helen's bedside and watched the machines breathe for her, his face carefully arranged into something resembling concern. But his actions told a different story. Within days, he began making phone calls, quiet ones, practical ones. He asked about plots at local cemeteries, about availability, about views. He spoke to funeral homes, comparing packages, discussing timelines. He listened closely when they explained that such preparations were common, even advisable, when outcomes were uncertain. He did not rush. He did not panic. He planned. Sam continued visiting the ICU regularly, always polished, always calm. To the staff, he appeared devoted, even patient. No one could accuse him of neglect. He brought flowers. He spoke gently, at least when others were present. And yet, everything he did suggested he had already accepted an ending. The accident itself raised no alarms. No witnesses reported reckless driving. No evidence suggested foul play. The police report concluded exactly what it appeared to be: a tragic collision on a dangerous road. Unfortunate. Unavoidable. But for Sam, the timing felt almost generous. Helen lay suspended between life and death, unable to object, unable to protect herself. Her name still carried weight, her assets still tied to her existence, but her voice, her will, was silent. As Sam reviewed documents and schedules, the possibilities settled quietly into place. If she did not wake up, the future would simplify itself. The crash had not caused suspicion, only opportunity. And as Helen lay motionless in the ICU, listening without being seen, the inevitability of that truth pressed down on her with a weight far heavier than the machines surrounding her. Long before the hospital bed, the machines, and the suspended hours of the ICU, Helen Markham had built a life defined by discipline and solitude. She was born into an academic family, the only child of two university researchers who believed deeply in rigor, precision, and intellectual honesty. Books filled their home. Conversations revolved around ideas rather than emotions. Love was present, but it was expressed through expectations and standards rather than warmth. Helen lost her parents early while she was still young enough to feel the absence as a permanent echo. The loss taught her self-reliance before it taught her grief. There was no extended family waiting to step in, no safety net of constant affection. She learned to stand on her own, quietly, without complaint. Independence was not a choice for her. It was a necessity that eventually became a principle. Her academic path felt inevitable. Mathematics offered clarity where life did not. Data behaved according to rules. Systems responded to logic. Helen excelled, not through brilliance alone, but through relentless effort and uncompromising standards. By the time she became a lecturer in applied mathematics and data science, she had earned a reputation that preceded her. Students spoke of her with a mixture of fear and respect. She demanded precision, refused excuses, and allowed no shortcuts. But she was fair. Those who met her standards advanced quickly under her guidance. Those who did not were forced to try again and again until they either improved or chose another path. Helen believed deeply that lowering expectations helped no one. Integrity, to her, was not negotiable. Outside the university, her life was quiet. She lived alone in a solid brick apartment building from another era, a place with wide stairwells and thick walls that carried sound poorly. It was there, on the floor below her, that Daniel Moore lived. Daniel was not part of Helen's academic world. He worked with his hands, not formulas. From his apartment, he ran a small workshop where he created portrait dolls, custom pieces crafted with meticulous detail, designed to resemble real people, down to the smallest expression. His work attracted clients who valued craftsmanship and patience, qualities that could not be rushed or replicated. Daniel noticed Helen long before she noticed him. He saw her in the stairwell, carrying stacks of papers, always moving with purpose. He admired the way she held herself, upright, self-contained, uninterested in unnecessary conversation. Over time, he learned her habits without intruding, her early mornings, her late nights, the quiet rhythm of a woman deeply absorbed in her work. His devotion remained unspoken. He never pressed, never intruded, never tried to insert himself into her life. Instead, he expressed his feelings through his craft. In private, Daniel created portrait dolls modeled after Helen. Not caricatures, but careful studies, respectful and precise. They were not meant for display or sale. They were simply his way of holding on to something he never expected to claim. Helen, for her part, remained unaware of the depth of his feelings. She appreciated his politeness, his reliability as a neighbor. Nothing more. Romance had never been a priority. Her sense of worth came from within, built on years of discipline and self-trust. This was who Helen Markham was before the hospital bed, not fragile, not passive, a woman shaped by loss, strengthened by solitude, and defined by integrity, long before anyone believed she could no longer hear, think, or fight. Sam Brooks grew up learning the weight of scarcity before he understood its cause. His childhood unfolded in rented apartments that changed whenever the rent rose, in neighborhoods where opportunity felt temporary and effort rarely led to stability. His mother worked long hours in physically demanding jobs, coming home each night with swollen feet and a tired silence that spoke louder than complaint. She had once dreamed of a different life, one shaped by talent and passion, but practicality had crushed those ideas early. From her, Sam learned one lesson above all others. Wanting more was useless unless it came with a plan to take it. Ambition took root early. He watched others escape poverty through education, timing, and association, and he memorized those paths carefully. By the time he entered university, he was already looking ahead, not just to a degree, but to leverage. It was there that he first noticed Helen Markham. She was his instructor, older, composed, respected. He saw her authority, her reputation, her apartment building near campus. What began as admiration quickly sharpened into calculation. Helen was intelligent, solitary, and powerful in ways that could not be taught in lectures. To Sam, she represented more than affection. She represented access. Their relationship unfolded quietly, hidden behind professional discretion and careful timing. For years, they kept their involvement secret, aware of the consequences if it became known. Sam learned how to speak to her, how to appeal to her sense of fairness, how to present his ambition as dedication. Helen, unaccustomed to emotional intimacy and flattered by his attention, allowed herself to believe in the connection. Marriage followed after the appropriate distance had been established. Publicly, it appeared unconventional but sincere. Privately, it marked the beginning of Sam's ascent. Helen supported him without hesitation. She invested her savings into his early IT ventures, introduced him to colleagues who later became clients, and lent him credibility he could not have earned alone. Her name opened doors. Her reputation reassured investors. Sam's company grew steadily, then quickly, and with each milestone, his confidence hardened into entitlement. Success changed him. He began to speak as if everything he had achieved came solely from his own talent. Helen noticed the shift, the way he minimized her role in conversations, the way he flirted openly at events. When she confronted him, calmly and directly, he dismissed her concerns as jealousy. He assured her she was imagining things, but he was not careful. Lily Carter entered his life quietly, a younger woman, ambitious, impressed by his status, unaware of the foundation beneath it. The affair felt effortless, intoxicating. With Lily, Sam could reinvent himself as self-made, admired, unburdened by obligation. At home, Helen became an inconvenience. The idea of divorce surfaced more than once, usually in moments of frustration. Each time, Sam followed the thought to its conclusion and stopped short. Divorce would cost him the apartment. It would fracture his professional network. It would expose how much of his success rested on Helen's support. He would lose everything he had built. And then the accident happened. Helen lay unconscious in a hospital bed, suspended between life and death, her assets intact, her voice absent. The law was clear. If she died, Sam would inherit what marriage had legally bound. No court, no explanations, no consequences. The realization did not arrive with drama. It formed quietly, settling into place like a final calculation. Helen's death would solve it all. As Sam stood beside her hospital bed, listening to machines breathe in her place, the thought no longer frightened him. It comforted him. It offered clarity where conflict once existed. For the first time, wanting more did not feel reckless. It felt achievable. The call came early in the morning. A hospital administrator delivered the news with a practiced, even tone, explaining that Helen Markham had passed away without regaining consciousness. The words were careful, clinical, designed to carry finality without emotion. Arrangements would follow. Documentation would be prepared. The body would be transferred. Sam Brooks sat on the edge of the bed as he listened, the phone pressed to his ear. When the call ended, he remained there for a long moment, staring at the wall across from him. Relief came first. It surprised him with its speed, its clarity. The tension he had carried for weeks loosened, his shoulders dropping as if a weight had been removed. Then, almost immediately, he corrected himself. Relief was dangerous. Relief left traces. He stood, walked to the mirror, and practiced his expression. His face softened, his eyes dulled. Grief, measured and believable, settled into place. The funeral arrangements unfolded quickly. Sam handled them efficiently, consulting with staff, selecting a casket, choosing a burial plot that overlooked the Monongahela River. The location was peaceful, elevated, with a clear view of the water below. He approved the choice without hesitation. It felt appropriate, almost generous. People attended, colleagues from the university, a few acquaintances. Sam stood near the grave, receiving condolences, nodding, thanking them. He played the role well, reserved, composed, visibly affected but not undone. No one questioned his sincerity. There was nothing about his behavior that demanded suspicion. When the service ended and the crowd thinned, Sam remained behind. The wind moved through the bare branches above, carrying the low sound of the river. He stepped closer to the grave as the last of the earth was settled. Leaning forward, he lowered his voice and spoke the final words only the ground would hear. "Rest now," he said softly. "It's over." The whisper felt intimate, final. That evening, Sam went to a bar near his apartment and drank until the room blurred slightly at the edges. The alcohol warmed him without comforting him. Laughter from nearby tables grated against his nerves. Eventually, he left and drove across town to Lily's place. She opened the door wearing concern that looked almost rehearsed. She spoke of sympathy, of patience, of giving him space. But when Sam reached for her, she hesitated. It was too soon, she said. People would talk. There were expectations. Annoyance flickered, sharp and brief. Sam left without arguing. Back home, the apartment felt hollow. Helen's presence lingered in subtle ways, in the placement of books, in the silence she had once filled with purpose. Sam poured another drink and sat alone, the relief from earlier already fading into something less definable. Emptiness, perhaps. He checked his phone repeatedly, as if expecting something to happen, though he could not have said what. The night stretched on, slow and uneventful, offering no sense of closure despite the burial that had taken place. By morning, exhaustion claimed him. The world had accepted Helen Markham's death. The hospital records were complete, the grave was filled, the rituals had been observed. To everyone who mattered, she was gone. And as Sam drifted into an uneasy sleep, the audience was left with the same belief, settled, unquestioned, and deeply unsettling, that Helen Markham's story had ended beneath the soil overlooking the river. Sam woke to the shrill vibration of his phone on the nightstand, a sound sharp enough to slice through his hangover. For a moment, he lay still, eyes half open, trying to place where he was and why his chest felt tight. Pale morning light filtered through the blinds. His mouth tasted of stale alcohol. Another vibration. He reached for the phone without thinking and glanced at the screen. Helen. The name sat there calmly, unmistakable, paired with a short message preview. Sam's breath caught. He sat up so fast the room tilted. "You promised a beautiful view." The words did not register all at once. He read them again, slower this time, his thumb hovering uselessly over the glass. The message referenced the grave, the river, the hill. "That's not possible," he said aloud, his voice rough. He unlocked the phone and opened the thread. The timestamp was current. No drafts, no glitches. Just a clean, ordinary text, as if sent by someone very much alive. Sam swung his legs off the bed and stood, pacing the small bedroom. His heart pounded hard enough to make his ears ring. He told himself there had to be an explanation, a delayed message, a prank, a mistake. Alcohol had a way of bending perception, especially after a night like the last one. He checked the contact details. Helen's number. The same one she had used for years. He searched for missed calls, voicemails, anything that might explain how the message had appeared. Nothing. Sam rubbed his face with both hands and forced a slow breath. He reminded himself of facts. He had seen the grave. He had stood there. The hospital had declared her dead. Paperwork did not lie. Another vibration cut through his thoughts. I can't see the river from here. The certainty in the words chilled him. There was no humor in them, no question mark, no hint of playfulness. They read like a complaint, like a correction. Sam's phone slipped from his fingers and landed on the bed. He stared at it, unwilling to touch it again. His mind raced through possibilities, hackers, mistakes, someone using her phone, but each explanation collapsed under the weight of detail. The message knew too much. It referenced a promise he had whispered at the grave, a moment no one else had witnessed. He picked the phone up again, hands trembling now, and typed a response he deleted twice before sending. "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. "You know who it is." His stomach lurched. Sweat broke out along his hairline. He backed away from the bed as if the phone itself might move. Another message followed, longer this time. "You chose the place. You said it wouldn't matter. You were wrong." Sam felt something inside him crack, not completely, but enough to let fear seep through. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing shallowly, counting each inhale as if it were an anchor. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It can't be." The phone vibrated again. "Come back." No exclamation points, no threats, just a statement, heavy with expectation. Sam's thoughts spiraled. He tried calling Lily, desperate for a human voice, but the call went unanswered. He left no message. He didn't know what he would say. Another text appeared. "If you don't come today, you won't wake up tomorrow." The words sat on the screen, immovable, final. Sam slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. His hands shook so badly he had to set the phone down between his feet. His heart raced, his thoughts tangled, but beneath the panic there was something else, an understanding he did not want to face. There was nothing supernatural in what he felt. No ghosts, no miracles, only fear, sharpened by guilt, feeding on every secret he had buried and every thought he had never said out loud. The messages stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. Because now Sam knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to let him pretend anymore. Sam arrived at the cemetery just after midnight. The iron gates stood open, their shadows stretching long across the gravel path under the weak glow of distant streetlights. Beyond them, the land sloped gently downward toward the river, the ground uneven and sparsely marked by headstones that caught the light and released it again. The night air was cold, damp with the scent of earth and water. He stepped out of the car and immediately felt exposed. There was no cover here, no walls, no corners to hide behind. The cemetery was wide and open, the kind of place where sound traveled too far and silence pressed too close. The river below murmured steadily, a constant presence, neither comforting nor threatening, just there. Sam walked slowly, his footsteps loud in his own ears. With each step, the messages replayed in his mind, precise and unforgiving. He told himself he had come to prove something, to confront a mistake, to end a hallucination fueled by guilt and exhaustion. The grave appeared sooner than he expected. The mound of earth was still fresh, darker than the surrounding ground. The flowers placed earlier in the day had already begun to wilt in the cold night air. Sam stopped a few feet away and stared, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The silence stretched. His shoulders loosened slightly. He took a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "This is stupid," he muttered. He turned to leave and froze. To the side of Helen's grave, closer to the river, the ground had been disturbed. A second pit lay open, its edges clean, its depth unmistakable. It had been dug recently, the soil piled neatly beside it. Sam's heart slammed against his ribs. He stepped closer, shining the weak beam of his phone's flashlight into the opening. At the bottom, 2 shovels lay crossed, metal catching the light. The sight triggered something primal, something cold and instinctive. "You said you wanted a view," a voice said behind him. Sam spun around. Helen stood a few yards away, motionless. She wore a long white garment that hung loosely from her frame, its fabric pale against the darkness. Her hair fell freely around her shoulders, framing a face that looked both familiar and wrong. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her skin appeared drained of color. The effect was deliberate, precise. She smiled. Sam staggered backward, nearly losing his footing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You're dead," he finally managed. Helen tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You were very convincing at the funeral." Fear overtook reason. Sam's legs weakened, forcing him to crouch near the ground. His breath came in sharp bursts, each one shallow and fast. He shook his head over and over, as if refusing to process what stood in front of him. Helen stepped closer. "I came because you asked me to," she said calmly. "You wanted to talk about where I belong." She reached into the folds of her clothing and produced a phone. Without breaking eye contact, she activated the camera and pointed it at him. "Say it again," she said. "Say what you wanted." Sam pressed his hands against his temples, rocking slightly. "I didn't mean, this isn't—" "You wanted me gone," Helen interrupted, her voice sharp now. "You thought it would make things easier." The words broke through his resistance. "Yes," he shouted, his composure collapsing. "Yes, I wanted it. I was tired. I wanted my life back. I wanted to be free." His voice cracked. He dropped his hands and looked at her, tears streaking down his face. "I didn't cause the crash, I swear. But when it happened, I didn't stop it. I let it happen." Helen moved closer, the phone capturing every word, every tremor. "You planned my burial while I was still breathing." Sam sobbed openly now, humiliation and terror twisting together. "I didn't think you could hear me." Helen stopped just a step away from him. The river murmured below, indifferent to the scene unfolding above it. The open grave loomed behind him, dark and waiting. In that moment, the performance reached its peak. Sam had nothing left to hide, and the night, vast and exposed, offered no escape from the truth he had finally spoken aloud. The darkness shattered in an instant. Floodlights flared to life from the edges of the cemetery, their harsh white beams cutting through the night and stripping the scene of every shadow. Sam flinched, shielding his eyes as the sudden brightness exposed everything. The open grave, the wilted flowers, the phone still recording in Helen's hand, and himself crouched on the ground, shaking and exposed. Footsteps followed. Several figures emerged from behind the headstones and nearby trees, their movements calm and deliberate. A police officer stepped forward first, his badge catching the light, followed by 2 investigators in plain clothes. Their faces were unreadable, professional, as if they were observing a procedure rather than the aftermath of a confession. "That's enough," one of them said evenly. Helen lowered the phone. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the lights wash over her. Then she reached up and untied the garment at her neck. The white fabric slipped away, revealing ordinary clothing beneath. Dark, practical, unmistakably alive. She pulled her hair back into a tight knot, her movements precise and controlled. When she straightened, the illusion dissolved completely. There was no ghost standing in front of Sam, only Helen Markham, alive, alert, unafraid. Sam stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The terror on his face gave way to confusion, then to a hollow realization that settled heavily in his chest. One of the investigators gestured toward the phone. "We have everything we need," he said. "Your statements are clear." Sam tried to speak, but the words tangled uselessly. You didn't cause the accident," the investigator continued, anticipating the defense. "And wanting someone dead isn't a crime, not on its own." Sam looked up, clinging to the words like a lifeline. "But planning her burial while she was still alive," the investigator added calmly, "and confessing intent, that tells us exactly who you are. That's what this was meant to establish." Helen stepped forward then, her expression composed, her voice steady. "This wasn't about punishing you," she said. "It was about knowing the truth." She turned to the open grave near the river. "There's no body there," she continued. "What you buried was a replica, a portrait doll." Sam followed her gaze numbly. Helen looked back at him. "Daniel made it. He's very good at what he does." The words landed with quiet finality. Police officers began to disperse. The controlled experiment concluded. No handcuffs clicked shut. No dramatic arrest followed. The law had drawn its line, and Sam stood firmly on the side of exposure rather than imprisonment. Helen faced him one last time. "I've already filed for divorce," she said. "You'll have a week to remove your belongings from my apartment. After that, any contact goes through attorneys." Sam searched her face for anger, for vengeance, for something he could recognize. He found none of it, only clarity. "You're free now," Helen added. "That's what you wanted." She turned away without waiting for a response. Sam remained where he was, the floodlights illuminating his isolation. His company, his marriage, his carefully constructed future, all of it had dissolved in the span of a single night. What remained was survival, stripped of ambition, stripped of illusion. As Helen walked toward the waiting officers, the lights dimmed behind her. Justice had not come with punishment or spectacle. It had come with exposure, and that was enough. Helen returned to the apartment alone. The space greeted her with a quiet that felt different now, no longer heavy, no longer watchful. She opened the windows first, letting cold air roll through the rooms, carrying away the stale traces of someone else's presence. Then she moved methodically, cleaning without urgency. She wiped down surfaces, folded linens, returned books to their shelves. Each small action felt deliberate, grounding. With every breath, the tightness in her chest loosened. For the first time in weeks, she breathed freely. There was no rush to reclaim anything symbolic, no need for dramatic gestures. Simply being there, alive and unafraid, was enough. The apartment was hers again, not as property, but as space, as choice. The knock on the door came in the late afternoon. Daniel stood in the hallway holding a small paper bag, unsure whether to step forward. He looked tired, but there was relief in his eyes. Helen opened the door wider and gestured him inside without ceremony. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from mugs. Neither of them rushed to drink. For a while, they spoke of practical things, the investigation, the paperwork, the end of it all. Then the conversation shifted, gently, into quieter territory. Daniel admitted he had always known something was wrong. Not the details, but the weight. The way Helen carried herself more rigidly than usual. The way her silences had grown sharper. He had stayed quiet, he said, because he didn't want to become another demand in her life. Helen listened without interrupting. "I thought strength meant enduring," she said finally. "I didn't realize how much of that endurance was just fear dressed up as discipline." They talked about timing, about years spent passing each other on the stairs, exchanging polite words while keeping their real thoughts safely contained, about how survival had narrowed her vision, reduced her choices to what felt necessary rather than what felt right, What lay ahead was not a promise, not a sudden declaration of certainty. It was simpler than that. A future built on choice, not on escape, not on endurance, not on proving anything to anyone else. Helen understood now that dignity was not something granted by others. It was something maintained, sometimes quietly, sometimes through difficult decisions. Self-preservation was not selfishness. It was clarity. She thought back to the ICU, to the moment she had first heard Sam's voice and felt her body respond before her mind had fully understood. The warning signs had been there long before the accident, subtle, persistent, ignored out of habit rather than trust. The body, she realized, often recognizes danger before love is willing to admit it. That evening, after Daniel left, Helen stood alone in the living room and looked around once more. There was no triumph in the moment, only peace. Fear had not survived. She had. To those listening, stories like this are not about revenge in the dramatic sense. They are about awareness, boundaries, and the quiet courage it takes to stop explaining away what feels wrong. If you've ever questioned your instincts or felt controlled in ways that were difficult to name, your experience matters. Share your thoughts in the comments. What does psychological control look like to you? How do you recognize the difference between love and manipulation? Your voice may help someone else recognize their own warning signs and choose